Hey, what's up guys? So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at some test results with the updated Redline 360c, as well as the new Escort Max 3. Now, as you guys know, the Redline 360c had some pretty serious issues at launch. I tested it when it first came out, and it looked really promising, but it had a lot of different issues with the detector. Now, fortunately, since then, Escort has released a new firmware update, firmware 1.3, and this looks to have fixed most all of the critical issues with the Redline 360c. And so for that reason, I actually wanted to go back out and retest the detector with the new firmware. Now, I was pretty limited on time for the test, so I actually dropped it down to only 5 detectors tested, plus I dropped it down to only 2 runs per detector. Now, as far as the different detectors that I tested, I've got the Redline 360c, again with the new update, as well as the Valentine 1 Gen 2 and the Uniden R7, which are the 2 closest competitors to the Redline 360c. I also reran with the Max 360c, and I also tested with the Max 3 to see what that's like. Now, for this test, there were 6 things specifically that I wanted to find out. First of all, I was really curious with the Redline 360c to see if the arrows actually now flip properly when you pass the source. The second thing, I wanted to see if the ramp up now actually works properly and it does a good job of actually communicating as you're getting closer to the officer. Third, I wanted to see how the rear antenna performance is and if the rear antenna is actually working properly now. Fourth, I was curious about the front antenna, just how the range compares to the R7 and the V1 Gen 2. Number 5, I'm curious how much better the Redline 360c compares to the Max 360c. And then number 6, I was curious to see how the Max 3 performs and specifically how it compares to the Max 360c, especially considering they're both Maxes. The Max 3 does have a new M4++ platform under the hood. It's not the same digital detector that we've seen with previous Max series detectors, so I was really curious to see kind of how the Max 3 compares. Now, I've got all these results actually posted on my website. If you'd like to take a look there, I'll put the link in the video description, so if you want to read over the results, they're all down there. Now, the test course is the Red Barn course that you guys have seen now over the past couple years. It's about a half-mile long course with some trees and curves and some things actually kind of blocking the radar signals from actually propagating downrange. So anyways, with all that said, let's go ahead and start diving into the results. First of all, taking a look at the Redline 360c's arrows. The arrows now with firmware 1.3 actually work great. As you pass the officers, the arrows will now properly flip from front to rear and transition to let you know that you've now passed the source. This actually now works properly in both directions, front and rear, with the Redline 360c. I also found now that the rear antenna now actually works properly. It holds on to the signal for quite a while, just like all the other detectors that also have a second rear-facing antenna. Now, as far as the ramp up is way better than it was originally with firmware 1.2. Now with this latest update, as you're driving towards the radar gun, the detector will actually properly ramp up and let you know that you're getting closer to the radar gun. And actually, here's a run real quick against 33.8. So as you can see, again, nice ramp up with the signal progressively getting stronger, and then again, the arrows flip after we pass the radar car. Now, I want to go ahead and show you another run real quick. This one's a little bit different, and I actually missed it until I sat down and I was editing this video and I was watching some more runs, and I found another one that actually has me a little bit concerned. This is going to be a rear 35.5 run, and I want you to pay attention to the fact that the detector does a nice job of actually giving me some advanced warning, but as I'm approaching the radar gun, the detector you'll see on the display, it's going to keep getting stronger and stronger, but for a period of time, the detector actually just goes totally silent. It does alert me before I get to the radar car, but for some reason it decides to stop alerting as I'm approaching. So weird, right? There was about a 4-second window there to where the signal was actually getting stronger, and you could see it on screen, but the detector decided it was better to stay silent. Obviously not good behavior, and this is something that needs to be addressed. Now, I'm not trying to like cherry pick good or bad events. If we look at the big picture here, the vast majority of the situations, it was just fine, and it was way better than it was previously. but it looks like there are still some instances to where the ramp up is not behaving properly and the audio is not matching what the detector can see and what it's displaying. Now, I know there's more updates that are planned for the Redline 360c, and I hope they take a second look at this just to make sure that when the detector is visibly displaying a signal, that's also audibly being reported without just going silent for a couple seconds. But as far as this firmware here with 1.3, the ramp up is way better than it was with 1.2. It's not perfect yet, as you can see, but it's definitely a big improvement over what we had before. Now, starting off with the long distance test results, let's start here with K-band. I tested with the Falcon HR mounted on my dash. I actually had it mounted upside down on my dash because it's easier to set down that way, and no, mounting it upside down doesn't affect the radar gun's properties in any way. It linearly polarized, it still works just fine, whether you're holding it upside down or right side up. Now, the way the radar gun was positioned, there was a lot of signal actually propagating downrange, and so despite the fact that it's kind of a lower power radar gun, all these sensitive radar detectors actually did great and gave plenty of alert warning. They were able to alert actually just after the red barn, and if you notice, most all of the detectors were able to alert right around the same spot. They actually did great here. Now, interestingly, taking a look at the results, TSR and TSF didn't seem to make any impact in this particular test, even though it actually has on this exact course in previous testing. Results can definitely vary from one test to another, but in this case, it looks like TSR didn't really have any impact, and I guess once you get just after the red barn, the signal is actually lasting long enough to punch through that filter. Now, what I did see, though, as negatively affecting the results is when I started backing down the detector sensitivity. And you'll see that here when I start switching over into auto mode here for the Escort detectors or advanced logic mode for the Valentine 1 Gen 2. Now, for the Escort, since this is what we're focused on for this video, highway mode is going to give you full sensitivity on K-band at all times. Auto mode actually varies it. At higher speeds, it gives you better sensitivity, but then at lower speeds, it's going to automatically start reducing the sensitivity just to help try and reduce false alerts, and we actually see that reflected here in the tests. If you take a look at maybe just the Redline 360c, for example, you'll see that when I drop it from highway down into auto mode, I get reduced range, and then when I drop it to auto low-K, which reduces it at all times independent of speed, I get even more reduction of K-band range. And just as a quick note, I had cruise control locked at 35 miles per hour for all of the K-band runs. Now, as far as the auto mode stuff, the big thing that I noticed was actually how the Max 3 responds. You'll see that when I switched it into auto mode, the performance was actually really bad. In fact, both of the runs that I had on K-band, it managed to get owned against constant on. As you can see, I got no advanced warning. It pretty much didn't alert me at all until I could see the radar car, and it was then able to go ahead and lock in my speed. In fact, the second time after that happened, I pulled over just to check to see if my gun was still working properly or it fell over or something. It was still working fine. It's just the auto mode here on the Max 3 is way too aggressive, and it will kill your performance on K-band. So I would definitely recommend avoiding auto mode here on the Max 3. Now, fortunately, after I did this test and posted the results online, I also reported the results to Escort, and they're going to be releasing a firmware update for the Max 3 to improve its auto mode to hopefully actually fix this issue, which is great to see. Now, something else that I'd like to point out is when I was running the detector in highway mode, not in auto mode, but in highway mode, the ramp up again did not ramp up properly here on K-band. I'll go ahead next and show you a run on K-band in highway mode, and what I want you to pay attention to is as I'm getting closer to the officer, you'll notice the signal ramps down, and then it's not going to start screaming full tilt until I'm practically passing the radar car. Great range, but bad signal presentation as I'm getting close to the threat. So as you can see there, it gave plenty of advanced warning, but it didn't do a good job of properly communicating the urgency of the threat and didn't really start screaming full tilt until I was pretty much already passing the radar car, right? So there's some issues here in signal presentation that I'm seeing here on K-band. I didn't really see it so much on Ka-band. This seems to be, at least for my testing, limited to K-band. Now, I actually saw something similar here with the Redline 360c when it was first launched, and I'm assuming it's the same sort of problem here, just carried over to the Max 3. So I'm hoping that this upcoming update for the Max 3 also helps address this ramp-up bug that we're seeing here on K-band, even in highway mode. Next, moving on to rear detection. I also then just turned around and drive back to the start of the test course, and I just wanted to check how long does the detector continue to alert as the radar gun continues to shoot me from behind. And so for this next test, we're taking a look at how long the detector continues to hold on to the alert from behind. Now, a lot of the top tier detectors actually did really well. They were all kind of in the same ballpark. There was one really good run here with the R7 to where it stopped alerting around when the other detectors were alerting, but then it actually reacquired the signal as I was getting closer to the red barn again. That was actually a really good run, and the best run actually came from the R7 from behind. Now, personally, I don't actually really care about getting crazy range from behind. The primary benefit of having the rear antenna in a detector so it can tell the difference between front and rear signal strength and give you arrows. That's really the main benefit. But as long as we have a rear antenna, I'd like to see really good rear antenna performance. And that was actually an issue here with the Redline 360c in the original firmware update. And now with 1.3, that looks to have been resolved. The detector actually now works properly as far as rear antenna detection. Now, interesting, something I found is it actually did really well even in auto mode or auto low-K, which is supposed to reduce detector sensitivity. It looks like with these filters, once it actually acquires a signal, it's going to continue to alert normally, even if you're traveling at low speed. So I didn't know that, but found it out here in this test. With the V1 Gen 2, switching it into advanced logic actually dropped the rear detection range quite a bit. Even worse, believe it or not, than the Max 3, which was running in highway mode. Now, that said, when I switched the Max 3 into auto mode, again, I had some really serious issues here. For one of the runs, it pretty much didn't alert until I was basically passing the radar car. But once I did get the alert, it at least managed to hold on pretty well. But it was kind of concerning just to see poor detection range, not letting me know that I'm literally just about to pass an officer shooting radar. Now, the even more concerning thing is what happened on the other run. In that one, I was able to completely drive past the radar car and I got no alert from the radar detector whatsoever. Now, that's really scary to be able to drive past a police officer who's actively shooting radar and your detector decides it's not going to alert at all. So clearly, whatever Escort is doing here with auto mode is not working. And so I'm really glad to see that they're going to be adjusting this and improving it here for the next firmware update. For the time being though, if you're running firmware 1.1, I would recommend not running auto mode and sticking to highway mode. I like auto mode to help filter out some false alerts from shopping center door openers and some BSMs at low speeds and stuff, but with the trade-offs I'm seeing in terms of performance, I would recommend sticking to highway mode for the time being. Now, finally, before we move on to KA, I also want to point out another issue that I found with the Redline 360c, and that is when I was actually approaching the radar car on K-band, the detector would actually sometimes start to overdrive. And even though there was only one radar source, one radar gun, as I would get closer to the radar gun and then pass it, it would actually jump up and say there's 3 different signals, not just one. Now, interestingly, that only looks like it happened in highway mode. I was reviewing the footage, and I found that when I was running it in auto mode or auto low-K, it always correctly reported just one signal. However, for some of the auto or auto low-K runs, the arrows were a little bit off. They might actually flip a little bit too early, and then kind of correct themselves, and then tried then flipping backwards again once I got a little bit farther away. So sometimes the arrows were a little bit weird in those, but realistically, that was kind of more the exception to the rule. There are always situations maybe where arrows will be a little tripped up due to reflections or whatever else, so that definitely happens. And what I found overall, kind of big picture with the Redline 360c, is that in general, as you're passing the radar car, yes, the arrows now do a good job of properly flipping to let you know that you've passed the source. Next, let's go ahead and move on to Ka band. I tested on 33.8, 34.7, and 35.5. So on 33.8, grabbed the MPH-B3, and I also moved the radar car forward a little bit and kind of tucked it behind this bush to try and cut down on the range, especially because all the detectors were doing so well on K-band and giving really long distance alerts, so I tried to just make it a little bit tougher and try blocking the signal somewhat. But again, these are all really sensitive detectors, so they all still did really well, despite my attempts to try to make it tougher for them. Now, looking at the test results then, the detectors kind of broke up into 2 different tiers. I had the V1 Gen 2, the Redline 360c, and the Uniden R7, all 3 of which managed longer distance alerts at least once. The V1 Gen 2 managed to do it both times. On the other hand, I had the Max 3 and the Max 360c, which only managed to do some shorter distance alerts. Now, the Max 3 actually had a slight edge, believe it or not, over the Max 360c. I wasn't totally sure if that was real or whatever, but I actually saw this continue on the other Ka bands and actually got more and more exaggerated and prominent, which we'll get into here in just a second. Moving on then to the rear detection, the V1 Gen 2 managed to hold on the longest, then the unit in R7 just behind, followed by the Redline 360c, and then we drop down to the Max 360c and the Max 3 with no rear antenna. Next, let's switch to 34/7 with the Stalker 2. Now, this was pretty interesting. When I tested last time, a lot of the detectors alerted right around the same spot just due to being terrain limited. And I saw something similar here this time around, but I also saw a little bit of separation as well, so I could see some of the differences in inherent sensitivity between the detectors. And if you take a look here, you'll notice that the V1 Gen 2, the unit in R7, and the Redline 360c all alert right around the same spot. And actually, believe it or not, the Max 3 was just a little bit behind. It was the Max 360c which actually trailed behind all of the other detectors, which is to be expected, but surprisingly, it also performed worse than the Max 3. Now, the Max 360c, it's supposed to be a better digital, more sophisticated platform than what's being used in the more analog Max 3, but nevertheless, for whatever reason, it looks like the Max 3 is actually turning out better front long-distance test results, which is actually pretty surprising. I was not expecting that at all. Moving on then to rear detection. Again, the V1 did the best as far as holding on to the rear. And then you can see most all the other detectors, they were alerting right around the same spot, a little bit of variability, but they were all roughly right around the same ballpark. Moving on next to 35/5 with the Detector Genesis 2. The results here are actually really similar to 34/7. Again, you'll see the Redline 360c, V1 Gen 2, and R7 all alerting around the same spot, plus the Max 3 just right behind, which again was really impressive. And then we see the Max 360c again lagging behind everything else, including the Max 3. This was pretty surprising to see this consistently happen here throughout the day. So whatever they're doing with the Max 3, it's not the same thing as the Max 360c, and the performance here is definitely looking promising. So good job here performance-wise from Escort with the Max 3. This isn't to say, of course, that the performance is identical to the other detectors. We need to take a look at a lot of different tests and stuff on different courses. Sometimes they all cluster together and alert right around the same spot, despite differences in sensitivity and stuff. But at least for this test specifically, what I can tell is the fact that the Max 3 does look to be more sensitive than the Max 360c. So very, very interesting. Moving on finally to rear detection on 35/5. The V1 Gen 2 did the best there, followed by the Redline 360c, then the R7. Then we start getting down to the Max 360c, and finally the Max 3, which doesn't have a rear antenna at all. So, some pretty interesting stuff here in the test, you know? I guess as far as maybe kind of some of the main takeaways that I found. Starting with the Redline 360c, the arrows finally now actually work properly, which I was really happy to see. Plus the ramp up now is much, much better. I won't say it's completely perfect, and I think it could use a little bit more tweaking in a future update, but currently I'd say it's about 95% of the way there. Definitely much better than it was before. In terms of the Redline 360c's performance, it's right around the same ballpark as the R7 or the V1 Gen 2. I think the biggest differences between the detectors are everything else in terms of BSM filtering and GPS and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of performance, they all seem to be right around the ballpark. Sometimes one detector does a little bit better, sometimes another detector does a little bit better. Compared to the Max 360c, the Redline 360c definitely outperforms that detector, which is what I was really hoping to see and what I was expecting. The only, I guess, real big issue at this point is the fact that sometimes when you get really close to a radar gun, the detector is more likely to actually overdrive and show too many signals. I have seen this with actually many other detectors as well over the years. It just seems like for whatever reason the Redline 360c is more likely to do this than other detectors. Then moving on to the Max 3, the performance here, especially on Ka band, was surprisingly good. I was not expecting that whatsoever, but it actually performed quite a bit better here than the Max 360c. It does, though, have some of its own issues here at launch. There's things like the ramp up needs to be fixed. Auto mode is just a bad idea to use right now with firmware 1.1, but luckily Escort is going to be addressing this, and I'm hoping that with the next update, I'm assuming firmware 1.2, they actually have auto mode fixed here so that we're able to use it in practice without taking such a massive hit to performance and range. So for the time being, I would say stick with highway mode if you're running a Max 3, and let's just wait for the update to fix the auto mode stuff. But yeah, with that said, that's the results of the testing. I'm finding the Redline 360c to now actually be more of what I was hoping and what I was wanting. It seems to be a pretty awesome detector across the board. There's still, again, a couple things I would like to see kind of perfected, but that's actually looking really, really promising. If you'd like to take a look at my updated review of the detector, now with the new firmware update, I'll drop a link in the video description to where you can read over that. I'm also planning soon on doing a review of the Max 3 as well. That, I'm guessing, should be up next week sometime. And then I also want to, of course, do video versions of those reviews as well, so definitely make sure you're subscribed for those videos once they come out as well. So awesome. Yeah, with that said, thanks so much for watching. I hope this was helpful for you guys. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope you guys did too. I hope you're all doing well, and I'll see you in the next video.